Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcast. You're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Ampire Media. That's AMPIRE. Always much appreciated when you tune in, and you can always read my work on ESPN.com. So today I'm going to talk about leadership because I think that's a big change for the organization. And we're talking about obviously at the top with Josh Harris, down to Adam Peters, to Dan Quinn, but now I'm going to talk about the players. The other stuff, first of all, that all matters. And I think I've said a couple of times, I think Adam Peters was the biggest offseason acquisition because I think everything starts to flow from there. His vision, the way he carries things out, the people he's brought in, starting with Dan Quinn, and then the scouting department going right to Jane Daniels, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's a big, big key. However, I want to talk about on-field stuff because that's also, and I will say this, before I get to the other part, it's been a big change there too, right? Like Dan Snyder was a lot of things and he was not a leader. He was a lot of bad things and he was not a leader. So he didn't know how to set the tone for a building in that regard. It was always going to be rudderless at the top. And then you had others, who maybe felt they were leaders, but maybe weren't or didn't execute the way they needed to in the leadership position. But I think you have guys now who understand their role. They understand what they need to do in that position, and everything goes from there. That is so much better than it used to be. Anyways, now let's get on the field about leadership, because the best teams that I've covered, and I haven't been, listen, done a long time, have been a lot of really good teams that I've covered, but the teams that tend to max out or achieve a little bit more have really strong leadership. Now, sometimes that can be teams that go 9-7. I've seen that here. There's one team, I think it was even in 15, where you had, Kirk Cousins played well down the stretch, very well, but there was also good leadership across the board with guys like Will Compton, Will Blackman. And I think all of that stuff matters. Shoot, I'll go back to 1999. That team surprise, it was, they're one that won the NFC East, the two offseason additions that they made, or two of the key ones, like in June, Larry Centers, a fullback, and then defensive end, Marco Coleman. Marco was a really, really good leader. I think it made a difference on that defense. You go to 2007, they bring in London Fletcher, and I think he made a pretty big mark on this franchise, and both with his play, but also from a leadership position. And the year he came in is the year that Sean Taylor died. And I think, a part of why they recovered, there were two reasons why they feel like the leadership was strong in the building, and a lot of it was him. I mean, I don't know that I've been around a guy who was as respected for his voice in the room as London Fletcher. That team also benefited from Todd Collins' quarterback play, but on the stretch, but you don't hold it together if you don't have good leaders. And again, I think that started with London Fletcher. I remember the day of Sean Taylor's funeral coming back. This was Fletcher's first year with the organization. He was the guy coming off the bus after they got back from the funeral that came and talked to us. And I just thought that was, he understood what his role was. That's part of it as well. So anyways, that's, I think it's not just about, I know sometimes you might see a clip of a guy like, getting into the players' faces and before practice. We used to see this with DJ Swearinger all the time. You'd see people here, it's like, oh, that's a leader. Well, that's not what is considered leadership and from the NFL standpoint. If you're getting in guys' faces, but you're also doing all the work and doing what you're supposed to do, and you're employing them, or you're, like, you got to be this or whatever, that can be a form of leadership. But what players see is, are you putting in the work? That's the first thing they're going to look at. Are you putting in the work? Are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? Then if you're doing those two things, I'm going to listen to you. But if you're not doing those things, people are going to roll their eyes. And again, I go back to the player I just mentioned, and that, that too often would happen here with him, and might be, so in other words, that's not necessarily leadership. Leadership is about approach, and it can be, you can't just be some quiet person and be a strong leader. You can lead by example, but to lead vocally like a Bobby Wagner or whatever, you're going to have to do this, this, and this, and then it gives you the cachet to then lead a certain way. Accountability is another part of that. And it's funny because one of the rooms I felt was the least accountable the last couple of years was the defensive line room. And I think that needs to change. And I think, we'll see if that will. But I think that is one that has to change. But to help with that, I think, and I would say this, there have been players on that defense who have longed for a leader for a few years. And they knew that somebody needed to be a leader coming from the linebacker position in particular. That's where Bobby Wagner comes into play. And that's why I'm going to talk about him, but also about, guys like Zach Ertz and Austin Eckler. And we heard some of the stuff the other day, more so about Ertz and about Wagner than about Eckler, but only because we didn't talk to any of the running backs. But I think he's going to fill that similar void as a guy that comes with some cachet, and then people know that he'll put in the work that is necessary to maintain a certain consistency on the field. That's what resonates, because when players see that, they pay attention, like, okay, this guy's doing X, Y, and Z, and he's playing for a 12th, 13th year, whatever. Maybe that's what I should be doing too. I think Wagner's a guy, he's not afraid to call guys out. He did that in Seattle. He was, it's early in the year. Last year was doing that in the locker room on a Wednesday. Like, that's the kind of stuff that I think this place is really needed. And I think, again, when you play a certain way, and I think Wagner can still play a certain way, is he still at an all-pro level? Maybe not, compared to where he was, but can he be very effective here? Yes, he can be. And, so it's not just, they've brought some players here in the past to just be a leader. Ryan Clark came here to be a leader. His play wasn't still where it needed to be. And so, and I also think that when he came here, I think he realized, like, it was going to take more than one voice to get it going. A lot of that you have to have certain things from the coaching staff, and then you've got to have the leaders in the locker room. But if it's all discombobulated elsewhere, it's going to be really hard for one guy with one voice to then rally everybody or get people where they need to be, because it's just really, really hard. You need a good leader in these rooms. Now, you may not have like the strongest, you're not going to have a Bobby Wagner in every room, but you definitely need guys who can show others. Terry McLaurin in the receivers room is going to be a good leader, certainly by example. And I think also just by how he conducts himself. You have Eckler in the running backs room. I think, in the quarterback's room, we'll see what kind of leader Mariota is. I don't know. This is somewhat of a new role for him. He's getting used to that role. So I know Brian Johnson liked what he did in Philly. I know there were some questions at the end in Atlanta. So we'll see what kind of role he has there, but then it's also incumbent upon Jaden Daniels to grow into that role. Do not expect him to be one right away. Let him grow into that role. That's why they've said this is why Ertz and Eckler are among the guys they brought in on offense to help offset some of that leadership burden, I guess, from him. But that will come naturally over time, I think, for him as well. Anyway, let's get back to Wagner, though, because I think he's a guy that you're going to feel that immediate leadership impact, right? And Sam Cosmi talked about this the other day after the OTA practice on Tuesday, and he said that he's getting in a stance, in a three-point stance, and he starts to hear Wagner yell out, he's pulling. And Cosmi's like, how the hell does he know that? And he asked Wagner later and said, because of how you were leaning. And he's like, and he just kind of shook his head. Now, I will say, when I go back and watch film of games and all that, sometimes you must say, why did this guy know where this guy was? Why did he react so fast on this play? And sometimes you can see a guy leaning a little bit. Not everybody looks for those clues, though, or not everybody sees them, because sometimes there's so much that you're worried about that maybe you forget to look for the little things. But that right there, that can help. First of all, dissecting the clues or seeing those clues, they're going to help Frankie Luvu. It's going to help Jamin Davis, but it's also going to help Sam Cosmi. Because when you see that, then if it puts it in Cosmi's head to know, like, oh, I've got to pay attention to this because I got a smart guy over here, that helps you grow as a player. So, and it helps the offense too, because now they may not know where it's going. But I mean, on a lot of plays, guys will give it away. Sometimes you see a guy coming, like sometimes you see a guy, where are they looking and why are they keep looking back? And you can say, okay, he's going to block here, or he's going to go here because of where they're looking all the time. But sometimes it's easier to see that above than when you're down on the field right in front of them. So, but when you have that, I think that it helps. And I think the leadership with Wagner, it'll help with Luvu, and Frankie Luvu was talking about. So I thought this was interesting too. And he's talking about just like biggest thing he's learning from Wagner is as much about habits. And again, this goes back to what I was saying earlier. but it's about habits, and it's about how do you, how to eat, how to take care of your body, little things that can help you grow and last in the game and play at a high level for a long time. Ryan Kerrigan was not a vocal leader. He's not a vocal guy. Even as a coach, you're not going to hear him all that much. He's a quiet guy, but what he would do is, just the way he took care of himself. He lasted and played at a consistent level for a long time. Guys take note of that. And if they will try to incorporate that into some of their game. But I think it's even stronger when it's a personality like Wagner, who not only will do that, but is also going to help you and force you to come along sometimes in a good way. I think that's an important thing too. Bring guys along. How can you bring guys along to that? I think that's what he does. And the other thing Luvu was talking about was how, he stays after practice and working on things that he needs to get better at, just from being with Wagner. One of those he said was working on knowing the splits of the receivers and studying more situational football. So that can help him as well. How much better will that make him? I don't know. Will it make him more consistent? Probably, if you do that enough. And again, I think the big one will be Davis, and how when Cole Holcomb was here with Davis, they felt like when he was on the field with Davis, that Davis was in a better spot because Cole could relay things that he needed to do, and it just allowed Davis just to go play. And Davis has the size and speed to go do that. Now, I don't know what kind of role he's going to have. I will say I think the linebacker depth is just a lot better this year, something we've all talked about over the last several years, needing it to improve. Well, I think it's there if he's going to be your third linebacker. And I like what, I think there's some other good depth. I think there's good depth there. I'm really curious to see what Jordan McGee does. And I think that's, again, being with Wagner, when you have a young guy like that, how do you develop players? Wagner's here for 1 year, maybe. Now, if he has a good year, maybe he comes back, but he's signed for 1 year. But part of what he can do here is help establish habits for players, especially a young guy like McGee. I think there's something there with him. He's got really good size. He's a big dude. But what kind of game does he have, right? And so how can a guy like Wagner help him? But I think those are the little things that you do that can make a difference, right? And it makes a difference between, maybe that gives you a couple more wins on the season. Maybe it's just, something like that. I don't know. It's hard to tangibly, to measure it, just the tangibles, right? That's an intangible. But so what is the tangible impact? I don't know. But what I do know is it helps and it makes a difference. Zach Ertz is another guy that you can talk about like that. And, one of the things I liked in talking to Ertz about this, and he said that first you have to get a personal relationship with somebody. And he says, I want them to know that I care about them. And one of the things when Alex Smith came here as a leader, one of the things he did is he wanted to go and sit by somebody different in the meetings every day so he could get to know them. That's how you start to impact someone else. I think Dan Quinn likes to move guys around in meetings too, get you to know more of your teammates. And I think that's a big key. And the other thing that Ertz said that I thought resonated was, he said at this stage of his career, this is something that he takes pride in. And I think that makes a difference as well. So, and he's like, he's willing to help anybody, whether it's, defensive lineman or whatever, if he sees something. And that's how you get better. It's not like it hasn't happened here in the past. It's not like no guys have ever done it. I just think these guys are different caliber, especially Wagner's a different caliber leader and able to do that and understands how you need to prepare and just how you need to act on a championship team, because that's mostly what he's been on, or at least he's played on teams that have played at a high level for most of his career. So I think he's going to want that to continue, but what lessons he can impart from that. And I think, again, all these guys bring a certain cachet because of what they've accomplished already. And the other thing, like Ertz talked about this too, is that the best players on the team have to be your hardest workers. That's when you have a really good team, which I think any coach would always say that when your best players, your best workers, that's when you'll be really good. So if you can get these guys to help develop some of that, I mean, I think one of the things that drew them to Jaden Daniels is the work that he puts in. And, I've told you before, and people who described him to me describe him as a football nerd. I mean, that's what you want. You're not, You're not seeing him posting videos of him tossing tires around and doing things that a quarterback doesn't do. He likes to get in, get his work. That's what Cliff Kingsbury does. So I think they're going to enjoy working with him, and working with Daniels. I mean, but that's the stuff that matters. And that's when guys are prepared and doing their work, that's what players respect. And the other thing with Ertz, he said that they're laying the groundwork and that the vets have to set the leadership. So, that's very key. But I think that's why these guys were brought in. Are they still playing at a high level? Maybe not. But, like a guy like Ertz, he's going to have to stay healthy and then produce. Because if you're not producing, then your word can get lost. But I do think that he still has something left to offer. And it's funny because I'm going to watch him more and more throughout the offseason and then during training camp, but just to watch what are the little things that he can do now as a tight end that maybe he's not as dynamic as he once was, but he can still help. And shoot, you'd see Jason Witten a few years ago in his last year or two in Dallas still have effective games, not because he was the same guy, but he knew more and he knew how to help a young quarterback. That's what I think Ertz can do. But again, they're here to help set a tone. And if that tone may not pay immediate dividends, we don't know. All right. I have no clue what's going to happen. But I do know if you can impart some of that wisdom on the young players who are receptive to it, because there haven't always been young guys here that have been receptive to that kind of, information. They maybe eschew it, or maybe they're not interested, or they think they've got it, whatever. But I do think that they looked for players, one who are leaders, and they drafted a bunch of leaders in the draft. They can't come in and be team leaders right away. But if they have that mindset, then maybe they're going to pay close attention to what those guys who have done it for a long time are now doing. That's how you start to build the cornerstone of a franchise. That and getting the right QB. And that, and with Daniels, we'll see. I think it's been a good start for him. But again, today I'm just talking about leadership, not quarterback. But if they do that, then I think they have a chance to build something that is sustainable. That's it for me. Thanks for tuning in. I'll be back on Monday with another episode. Got a special guest. Very excited about this one. I think you'll learn and enjoy it. So I will talk to you next time.